afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's lecture, we're going to discuss on an important topic in sociology, that is social inequality. Now, this is an issue which is taught in many of the undergraduate courses, and recently there is a paper titled Social Inequality taught as a GE, which is interdisciplinary in the NEP syllabus. Basically, we're going to understand the contribution by renowned sociologist Andre Bethe in terms of trying to figure out how this concept of social inequality has been studied in sociology specifically. So, when we look into social inequality, we see that it's a broad and a general problem of all contemporary societies. In the past, society differed greatly in their attitude to inequality, but in the present, members of all societies are aware of the problem of inequality. So, the whole idea is to understand social inequality as a concept, whether it is to be found in the past primitive society or in the modern industrial society is not of significance. The important aspect is to understand this concept as it affects the social relationship, social structures in society. So, but when we come to contemporary society and with the emergence of nation state, modernity, equality or egalitarianism became significant as an ideology. So, to be equal became a mark of a progressive developed society. With industrialization, globalization, rationality became important, and therefore, becoming egalitarian became something that every society aspired to achieve. Equality became a symbol of development and a variable for progress. Much of the social science documentation has been to see this evolution of society from an unequal, stratified society to an egalitarian society. And for that context, societies like USA, USSR, they started justifying their system as the best model for egalitarian society. What this mean is that the system or the structure which was present in the society was portrayed as egalitarian and also as a lesson for the underdeveloped, primitive, the third world countries to kind of change their structure according to the models of an so-called egalitarian society. So, the more backward society, the chief appeal of industrialization is the promise it holds of bringing equality under control. So, when this industrialization development progress started, the agenda was to make backward society more egalitarian. So, the moment the inequality was done away or was removed from the society would become more progressive and would be considered as a developed society. The term social inequality has occupied a central place in all discourses of social science under different names. In sociology, scholars have problematized the term since its inception, though with different perspective. So, when we look into the discourse or the discipline of sociology, and many of us or most of us are aware of the fact that sociology as a discipline emerged at a time of a crisis, and a crisis which was kind of considered as a center point for the transformation of society. And a lot of upheavals in the names of industrialization, urbanization, modernizations were taking place, and these changes, economic political changes, had transformed the social structure, and therefore the argument was that as society is progressive, they are moving towards a kind of a more problematic zone. So, the discourse of social inequality and sociology were kind of parallelly growing. In sociology specifically, if we go back to the initial work of sociologists, we see the most of the focus of these classical thinkers were around moral commitment. The commitment to ensure that they provide a solution to the society, and the solution to these transformation or upheaval was to do away with the criteria or variables which were causing inequality in society, and bring in institutions which could be more egalitarians. So, in place of the feudal laws, we started having a nation state where a uniform law would be into function for all citizens of the country. So, you had a say simple society without say any kind of a state apparatus. The political system was dependent on the leaders and the hierarchy, the hereditary transition of power from the king to the son. So, it was considered to be unequal because it would give preference to a certain community over the other. When we started having nation state as an institution, it was ensured that everybody had equal rights in terms of the state regulations. So, that was the focus of the scholars studying inequality in the classical period. Now, when we study social inequality, there are a number of terms which are used synonymously, like difference, strata, inequality. So, these are all synonymous, and what we actually want to understand is the difference and inequality. Are these two terms similar, or is there any kind of distinction between the two? So, we say people in society are divided in different categories and based on one set of criteria. So, every society has certain variables by which they kind of group individual in that, and these categories or groups are simply reflects the difference between people grouped into them. So, if we just use any criteria and make groups or categories, but they are all kind of similar in terms of access to resources, in terms of the interaction with each other, interaction with society, then they are only different. So, you have four groups in a society, say A, B, C, but they are all in kind of equal status, they have equal access to resources. What is inequality is that when these different categories are given different weightage or they are given different importance. So, one group is given more weightage compared to the other, and the categories are assigned unequal statuses or unequal rewards. So, every category therefore has a different rank or different position in the society, and depending on the position they have unequal access to the resources and reward. So, when differences are legitimized through the assigning of different status and resources, it changes to inequality. Different categories of people are treated alike is difference, and when they are treated differently, it leads to inequality. This concept of difference in social categories, when unequal statuses and rewards are attached to social category and these are ranked on the basis of one or more defining factors, they are treated as unequal. According to Dipankar Gupta, a renowned sociologist and professor from Jawaharlal Nehru University, he argues in his work that differences assume importance when ranking diversities become difficult. So, how do you kind of make sure that all the categories are ranked in a manner that they have access to the same resources, are rewarded the same kind of returns? So, it would be difficult, and that is the reason why, because of limited resources, there is a limited reward, that stratas are created, and every strata would therefore kind of have a different position in society. Besides the difference between difference and inequality, the other concept which is significant is the difference between natural and social inequality. According to Andre Bethe, the first step towards a sociological understanding of the problem was taken when a distinction was made between natural inequality among men and inequalities in their conditions of existence. So, natural differences is the physical differences. So, there is a difference between the say physical body of people from different place, there is a different structure, physiological difference between women and man. So, this is a natural difference. Bethe claimed that in pre-industrial societies, which were generally organized on a hierarchical basis, and the hierarchical basis was on age, gender, existing inequality must have appeared at the same time, both natural and social. So, before the sociologists started making sense of inequality, there was no distinction between what is natural inequality, what was social, because it was assumed that these natural differences were kind of only the way in which social relations were being structured. Just as men are naturally superior to animals, so also different orders of men born into different castes or estates are naturally endowed with inequality. So, once there was this understanding that there is a difference between man and the animal world, the understanding was that this system of stratification, caste, estate were natural. People were born into these categories, and therefore, there was nothing kind of social or cultural in it. Interest in the subject of the origin and foundation of inequality, that is social inequality, can be traced to the times of Rousseau. He explained that equality prevailed so long as people remained content with their way of life. So, if they had no kind of questions, if they were not critical of the way in which the relations were there, they were kind of only existence of natural inequality. Rather, it was considered as natural, or it was kind of justified. When one category started facing objection to the strata or to the reward being given, and they started critiquing the system, that is when there will be a space for the emergence of social inequality. From the time one person began to stand in need of help of another, when one person began to collect provisions, work became inevitable and equality in relationship disappeared. For Rousseau, natural inequalities among men were unimportant and political inequalities of wealth, honor and power were more important. He identified two kinds of inequality among people. The first is the natural or physical inequality, referring to difference of age, health, bodily strength, mental abilities, and second is moral or political inequality, referring to difference in privileges that are established or authorized by the consent of people themselves. That is, examples are power and honor. Tocqueville accepted that inequality imposed by nature on people was difficult to get rid and that equality remained a cherished ideal. When we try to understand the way in which it gets problematized and look into the study of inequality in sociology, what comes to our mind is these names, thinkers who have contributed significantly, and two such great thinkers who kind of are significant in understanding the concept are Tocqueville and Marx. Now, when we look into these scholars or sociology of this for the study of inequality, we see that there is some kind of a limitation, and Anthropology is pointing out at these limitations. One of the idea that he points out is that sociology is a product of Western experience, significant to the world but limited in time and space. The discipline was responding to the Western experience as universal and uniform. So, as we have already discussed, that sociology was emerging in the West, especially as a response to the upheaval being caused, and this problem which was emerging in the West was kind of visualized as universal and uniform, and sociology was kind of seen as a solution to this problem. Now, the problem is that a true science of society could not emerge until we pull out or bring in the experience of all societies, whether backward or advanced. So, much of the beginning of classical period of sociology we see is kind of more tilted towards the experience of the Western society, and therefore, much of the scholarly work on inequality is the study of inequality in industrialized Western societies. And here we can look into two kinds of or two contrasting approaches. So, even when we look into the Western approach to inequality, we see within the Western approach also there are two different approaches. First is European approach rooted in the philosophical speculation on the moral basis of inequality. And the second is Americans' obsessive concern with scientific methodology at the expense of empirical problem. Now, in the European approach, the focus was understanding class in the narrow Marxian term. So, the Marxian term is to focus on class analysis and class as an emergence of the materialist position in society. So, there was a kind of a lack of distinction in the European approach between a philosophical approach and a sociological problem. The American scholars on the other side were obsessed with the problems of social stratification, and they made efforts to kind of understand whether this stratification was inevitable and it was functional for the society. So, in America, industrialization was causing a lot of distinction between the people who could earn and the others who kind of were pushed towards poverty. So, one of the idea of understanding inequality was to understand this stratification based on the changes which was taking place. On the other side, if we look into it, race as a system of stratification was kind of profound in America, and therefore, the effort was to understand social stratification. Andre Bethe advocated a mid path. He says the concern should neither be with a normative question, because the normative questions belongs to the discipline of philosophy, nor should it be entirely dependent on a scientific or rigorous method, because if we are too rigorous and use scientific method, then we are tending to miss out the empirical social realities, which can be only studied by looking into the meaning, symbols and interaction. If we look into the both European and American approach to the study of social inequality, there is a kind of a limited bias, and the bias is that both the European and the Americans, they were studying their own society, and this can be termed as an ethnocentric bias. That is, you are kind of studying your own society and also kind of coming out with the idea that what is the system in your society is kind of best, and others can transform by taking your system in place. At the same time, some issues were overstressed while others were neglected. According to Lenski, the American approach to social stratification is not appealing to many. Why? Because the system of stratification that was there in America was not necessarily to be found in other societies. So, they could not make sense of the set of conditions under which stratification was being studied in the American context. The European preoccupation with class consciousness, again if we look into Marx theory, he was talking about class conflict, class consciousness. So, these terms kind of appear bizarre or kind of appear strange to the Americans. So, social inequality existed in both Western and non-Western society. However, the latter provides a better context to study the problem, as inequality exists in most extreme and manifest form as a set of facts and as a system of value, and this exists more in the non-Western society. So, the idea is to study more of these stratification inequality in the non-Western society, that is to study the agrarian society, the rural society, non-Western society. Another significant distinction that Bethe points out is the distinction which is between sociology and anthropology, and he terms this as an artificial distinction because it was there only in the beginning of the emergence of these disciplines. As soon as the discipline kind of developed and got spread out in other continents, this distinction kind of disappears. And what happened was the idea is that you were only studying your own society from your own perspective. So, there was an absence of a comparative analysis. Now, this distinction between the two disciplines is the anthropology and sociology. Now, the social anthropologists were kind of seen as those who were studying the other culture. Now, these other cultures were the primitive and simple society. So, the anthropologists were from advanced industrial society and they were studying the simpler society and with the intention of providing them a solution for progress and development. When sociologists and anthropologists from Asia and Africa started studying their own society and other culture, the distinction disappeared. Now, Bethe also talks about two aspects of social inequality. He suggests that they are a kind of one is the distributive aspect, which distributive means distribution. So, you depends on how much the different resources are distributed among the members of the society. So, factors like income, wealth, occupation, education, power, skill, etc., are distributed, and on the basis of this distribution the stratas are constructed. So, the distributive inequality provides the basis of interpersonal interaction in society. The second form of social inequality according to Andre Bethe is the relational, of which refers to the ways in which individual differentiated by the different factors relate to each other. Here the thrust is on interaction of people belonging to one group or category. So, if we look into the relational inequality, the caste system would be the best example. Bethe explains the major forms of social inequality that have been studied by sociologists intensively are those that rise out of disparities of wealth and income, those that have a bearing on unequal prestige or honor, and third, those that are born out of imbalance in the distribution of power. Unequal distribution of wealth and power in society has a widespread consequences. Number one, difference in wealth will produce fairly distinct strata of people who will be separated from each other by those differences and who may come over time to form quite distinct social units. Number two, such segmentation of the society lessens the possibility of social solidarity and in turn of society-wide consensus on the most important issues such as the use of public fund. Now, if we look into the idea that much of the Western society, the initial classical period was studying the urban society. Bethe advocates the study of the agrarian society, inequality found in the agrarian society, and that he says would be important in order to kind of understand the idea that inequality is inevitable. And studies have rejected the assumption that primitive societies were unstratified and rank and status present, but different form from modern society. So, the study of social inequality in the non-Western societies serves two purposes. Number one, to show universal nature of social inequality, and number two, to bring out light the forms and base of inequality which appear unusual from the viewpoint of modern society. So, that is how we kind of make a effort to understand social inequality and the way it has been studied, understood in sociology. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.